Is this the end of the world? A number of people have asked me that question in light of the coronavirus. I'm a priest and I know something about the Bible, so people have asked me, is this the end of the world? People have always been fascinated and troubled by this question. In Christian history, there have been many examples of believers deciding the end times have arrived. In the 1970s, when I was in college, there was a big revival of this idea in conservative Christian circles. But in the middle of the 1800s, there was also a huge movement of Christians who said that Christ was going to return any day now. Going back even further, in the Middle Ages, especially due to the Black Death, which killed fully 1/3 of the population of Europe, people thought the end had come. But back further yet, in the 4th century, there was a movement of Christians called Montanists who believed that the end was nigh. And I have to tell you that if you read the letters of St. Paul in the New Testament, you can see that he was sure that he himself would be alive here on earth to witness the return of Christ and the end of the world. Now, all of these people had one thing in common. They were wrong. We are still here in spite of the beliefs of end-time enthusiasts from St. Paul to Montanus to William Miller to Hal Lindsey. If only they could have paid more attention to the words of Jesus. When Jesus spoke of the end of all things, he said, "Of that day or hour, no one knows, not the angels in heaven, nor even the Son, but only the Father." So I have my answer to the question, does COVID-19 indicate the end of the world? No, the world is not coming to an end. But the world is changing. We are in a new situation, and we hate change. All of science tells us that change is a permanent feature of human existence, but we don't like change. And that makes sense because it can undermine our feelings of security and safety. But the world is changing. Sorry to say, the situation is normal in this abnormal way. And if you know some history, it can help. It can give some perspective. I already mentioned the pandemic of the 14th century, which killed 1/3 of the people in Europe. What if you imagine people of my grandparents' generation? Let's say my grandma was born in the year 1900. When she turned 14, the First World War broke out, and it lasted until she was 18. 22 million people died in that war. And also, when she was 18, an epidemic broke out. We call it Spanish flu. And it didn't end until she was 20 years old. And 50 million people died from that epidemic around the world. When Grandma was 29, the Great Depression began. The world economy collapsed, and there was great suffering. When Grandma turned 39, the Second World War began, and it wouldn't end until she turned 45. 75 million people died around the world in that war. When Grandma turned 50, the Korean War broke out. That one killed 4 million. Until Grandma was 55, polio was a real fear every summer. People could get the disease and then maybe die or at least be paralyzed. The Vietnam War followed that. And Grandma knew about the terrible death toll, and she also knew how that war tore our nation apart. Then there was the fear of nuclear weapons, which came close to ending the world a few times in recent history. Grandma lived through that, too. And you know, those of us who were children in the 1960s worried that we would not live to see our 30th birthday because we really thought there would be a nuclear war. Now, I don't remind you of all this history just to spread depression or despair. What all this history does teach us is that danger and turbulent change are not unique to this present moment. Is this the end of the world? No. We are just as much in God's hands now as we were in 1995 or 1975 or 1945 or 1918 and 1845 and even the year 1300, not to mention the year 50 when the Apostle Paul was writing. I think we should be as resilient as our grandmas were. Now, we do have one challenge that our grandmas did not have. Today, we are robbed of one of our greatest strengths. Because of this pandemic, we cannot gather in community. We cannot be together as the whole church. And that is a tremendous loss, a real grief. As Christians, just as humans, we are strengthened by being together. We need community. We cannot have it in our traditional ways right now. We are lucky that we have the internet at this point in our history, the telephone service, and we can still socialize in limited ways in person using appropriate physical distancing. We still have prayer, and we still have faith. We still have our story of the God who became one of us and knows how we feel. As our communion prayer puts it, God sent His only Son to share our human nature, to live and die as one of us. God knows how we feel, and God suffers with us. This epidemic has robbed us of our full community for a while, but it has not robbed us of what our community stands for: compassion, care, and hope. We look forward to better days. By God's grace, we will get there. So, let's be grandma strong, like a grandmother born in the year 1900.